Welcome to the Artificial Fluency Podcast. I am Olivia, your host for today's extended exploration into one of humanity's most essential skills, the art of persuasion. In this comprehensive 60-minute examination, we shall delve into the sophisticated mechanisms of rhetoric, analyze contemporary applications of classical persuasive techniques, and develop your capacity to both employ and critically evaluate persuasive discourse in professional and academic contexts. Whether you are preparing for high-stakes presentations, academic debates, or simply seeking to understand the persuasive forces that shape our modern discourse, today's discussion will provide you with the analytical framework and linguistic sophistication necessary for mastery. The study of persuasion represents perhaps the oldest systematic investigation into human communication. From Aristotle's foundational treatise on rhetoric in 4th century Athens to contemporary research in cognitive psychology and behavioral economics, scholars have sought to understand how language shapes thought, how arguments achieve their effect, and why certain speakers possess the remarkable ability to move audiences toward action, while others, despite possessing superior knowledge or more compelling evidence, fail to persuade. This enduring fascination with persuasive power reflects a fundamental truth about human nature. We are, at our core, social beings whose survival and prosperity depend upon our ability to influence others and, equally important, to recognize when others are attempting to influence us. In our interconnected digital age, where information travels instantaneously across global networks and where algorithmic systems curate the messages we encounter, understanding the mechanics of persuasion has become not merely an academic pursuit, but a practical necessity for informed citizenship and professional success. Today's examination will proceed through 4 distinct yet interconnected segments. We shall begin with an exploration of classical rhetorical theory, examining how ancient insights into human psychology remain remarkably relevant to contemporary communication challenges. Subsequently, we shall analyze the linguistic and structural elements that constitute effective persuasive discourse, with particular attention to advanced vocabulary and syntactic patterns that characterize sophisticated argumentation. Our third segment will focus on the evolution of persuasive techniques in digital environments, considering how social media platforms, algorithmic curation, and data-driven targeting have fundamentally altered the persuasive landscape. Finally, we shall conclude with practical applications, providing you with concrete strategies for developing your own persuasive capabilities while maintaining ethical standards and intellectual integrity. Let us commence our investigation with an examination of classical rhetorical theory, beginning with Aristotle's tripartite framework of ethos, pathos, and logos. These 3 modes of persuasion, conceptualized over 2 millennia ago, continue to provide the foundational architecture for understanding how effective arguments achieve their impact. Ethos, derived from the Greek word meaning character or custom, refers to the credibility and moral authority of the speaker. In contemporary terms, we might describe ethos as the perceived trustworthiness, expertise, and integrity that an audience attributes to a communicator. This credibility operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Surface-level indicators include professional credentials, institutional affiliations, and demonstrated expertise in relevant domains. However, more subtle elements contribute equally to authentic appeal. The speaker's apparent sincerity, their acknowledgement of complexity and uncertainty, their fair treatment of opposing viewpoints, and their demonstration of shared values with the audience. Consider, for instance, how medical professionals establish ethos when communicating with patients about treatment options. Their credibility derives not solely from their educational credentials or institutional positions, but from their demonstrated competence, their willingness to acknowledge the limitations of medical knowledge, their respect for patient autonomy, and their apparent concern for patient welfare rather than personal profit. Advanced English speakers must understand that establishing ethos requires sophisticated linguistic choices. The precise use of technical terminology, balanced with accessible explanations, the employment of conditional and hedging language that demonstrates intellectual humility, and the strategic deployment of personal anecdotes that humanize expertise without undermining professional authority. The second classical mode, pathos, encompasses the emotional dimensions of persuasion. While contemporary discourse often positions emotion and reason as fundamentally opposed forces, sophisticated rhetorical analysis recognizes that emotional appeals, when employed ethically and skillfully, can enhance rather than subvert rational decision-making by helping audiences understand the human significance of abstract arguments. Pathos operates through multiple mechanisms, each requiring nuanced linguistic execution. Narrative techniques allow speakers to transform statistical abstractions into concrete human experiences, enabling audiences to comprehend the personal implications of policy decisions or institutional changes. Metaphorical language creates cognitive bridges between familiar experiences and novel concepts, facilitating both understanding and emotional engagement. Strategic word choice, particularly the selection of terms with positive or negative connotations, shapes audience perceptions before explicit arguments commence. Advanced practitioners of persuasive discourse understand that effective pathetic appeals must appear natural rather than manipulative, arising organically from the logical structure of the argument rather than functioning as external emotional manipulations. This requires exceptional linguistic sophistication, the ability to embed emotional content within apparently objective descriptions, to employ metaphors that illuminate rather than obscure logical relationships, and to modulate emotional intensity in response to audience reactions and contextual demands. Contemporary research in cognitive psychology has validated many classical insights regarding the relationship between emotion and cognition. Studies demonstrate that emotional engagement enhances memory formation, increases attention to persuasive messages, and facilitates the integration of new information with existing belief systems. However, this same research reveals the potential dangers of purely emotional appeals. Their capacity to bypass critical thinking, to promote polarization rather than reasoned discourse, and to exploit psychological vulnerabilities for manipulative purposes. Logos, the third classical mode, encompasses the logical structure and evidential foundation of persuasive arguments. While ethos establishes credibility and pathos generates engagement, logos provides the rational architecture that transforms mere assertions into compelling demonstrations. Understanding logos requires mastery of multiple interconnected elements, logical reasoning patterns, evidential standards, causal analysis, and the sophisticated presentation of complex arguments in accessible yet rigorous forms. Classical logic distinguishes between deductive and inductive reasoning patterns, each serving distinct persuasive functions. Deductive arguments proceed from general principles to specific conclusions, offering the satisfaction of logical certainty when premises are accepted. However, advanced persuaders recognize that deductive arguments, while logically sound, often fail to persuade audiences who question the foundational premises. Consequently, sophisticated rhetorical practice frequently employs inductive reasoning, building from specific examples toward general principles, allowing audiences to participate in the reasoning process rather than simply accepting predetermined conclusions. Modern argumentation theory has expanded beyond classical logical categories to encompass probabilistic reasoning, causal inference, and analogical thinking. Contemporary persuasive discourse must navigate statistical evidence, scientific studies, expert testimony, and comparative analysis, each requiring distinct presentational strategies and linguistic competencies. Advanced English speakers must demonstrate facility with conditional language, qualification markers, and hedging devices that accurately represent the uncertainty inherent in complex evidence while maintaining persuasive force.
Furthermore, effective logos in contemporary contexts requires meta-argumentative awareness, the ability to acknowledge competing interpretations of evidence, to address potential counterarguments preemptively, and to position one's own argument within broader scholarly or professional discourse. This demands sophisticated command of academic and professional registers, including the precise use of specialized terminology, the appropriate citation of authorities, and the strategic employment of concessive language that demonstrates intellectual sophistication while maintaining argumentative momentum. Having established this classical foundation, let us now examine how these fundamental principles manifest in advanced English discourse through specific linguistic patterns and structural techniques. The development of persuasive competency at an advanced level requires mastery of particular grammatical structures, lexical choices, and organizational patterns that distinguish sophisticated argumentation from elementary persuasive attempts. Consider first the strategic employment of modal verbs and conditional structures in advanced persuasive discourse. While beginning students of English might rely heavily on simple declarative statements and categorical assertions, advanced speakers understand that persuasive power often emerges from apparent intellectual humility and careful qualification of claims. The sophisticated use of modal verbs, such as might, could, should, and would, allows speakers to present arguments as reasonable possibilities rather than dogmatic pronouncements, thereby reducing audience resistance while maintaining substantive content. Similarly, complex conditional structures enable advanced speakers to explore hypothetical scenarios, acknowledge alternative possibilities, and demonstrate the logical relationships between different courses of action. Consider the difference between the elementary statement, "We must change our marketing strategy," and the more sophisticated formulation, "Should we continue with our current approach, we might find ourselves unable to compete effectively in an increasingly crowded marketplace," whereas a strategic pivot toward digital platforms could position us advantageously for sustained growth. The latter formulation demonstrates linguistic sophistication while presenting the argument as a logical analysis rather than an arbitrary directive. Advanced persuasive discourse also employs sophisticated transitional language that guides audiences through complex argumentative structures while maintaining logical coherence. Beyond elementary connectors such as because and therefore, sophisticated speakers deploy a rich arsenal of transitional devices, concessive markers such as nevertheless and notwithstanding, explanatory phrases such as that is to say and in other words, and progression indicators such as furthermore, moreover, and in addition to these considerations. These linguistic tools enable the construction of arguments that acknowledge complexity and nuance while maintaining clear logical progression. The lexical dimension of advanced persuasive discourse demands particular attention to register appropriateness, precision of meaning, and connotative effects. Advanced English speakers must demonstrate command of multiple linguistic registers, adapting their vocabulary choices to audience expectations and contextual demands while maintaining consistency and authenticity. Academic and professional registers require mastery of specialized terminology that demonstrates expertise while remaining accessible to intended audiences. This involves understanding not merely the denotative meanings of technical terms, but their connotative effects and their positioning within disciplinary discourse communities. For instance, the choice between hypothesis, theory, and speculation in academic contexts carries significant implications for how audiences evaluate the credibility and importance of proposed ideas. Furthermore, advanced persuasive vocabulary includes sophisticated hedging language that enables speakers to make strong claims while acknowledging uncertainty and alternative perspectives. Terms such as arguably, presumably, ostensibly, and conceivably allow for nuanced presentations of evidence and reasoning that demonstrate intellectual sophistication without sacrificing persuasive impact. The strategic deployment of such language requires understanding both its logical functions and its social effects, how it positions the speaker as thoughtful and careful, rather than dogmatic or simplistic. Advanced speakers also understand the persuasive power of metaphorical language and must develop competency in employing metaphors that illuminate rather than obscure logical relationships. Effective metaphorical thinking requires cultural literacy, understanding how particular images and comparisons will resonate with specific audiences, and sensitivity to the potential limitations and distortions that metaphors might introduce into complex discussions. Advanced speakers also understand the persuasive power of metaphorical language and must develop competency in employing metaphors that illuminate rather than obscure logical relationships. Effective metaphorical thinking requires cultural literacy, understanding how particular images and comparisons will resonate with specific audiences, and sensitivity to the potential limitations and distortions that metaphors might introduce into complex discussions. Advanced persuasive discourse also employs sophisticated transitional language that guides audiences through complex argumentative structures while maintaining logical coherence. Beyond elementary connectors such as because and therefore, sophisticated speakers deploy a rich arsenal of transitional devices, concessive markers such as nevertheless and notwithstanding, explanatory phrases such as that is to say and in other words, and progression indicators such as furthermore, moreover, and in addition to these considerations. These linguistic tools enable the construction of arguments that acknowledge complexity and nuance while maintaining clear logical progression. The lexical dimension of advanced persuasive discourse demands particular attention to register appropriateness, precision of meaning, and connotative effects. Advanced English speakers must demonstrate command of multiple linguistic registers, adapting their vocabulary choices to audience expectations and contextual demands, while maintaining consistency and authenticity. Academic and professional registers require mastery of specialized terminology that demonstrates expertise while remaining accessible to intended audiences. This involves understanding not merely the denotative meanings of technical terms, but their connotative effects and their positioning within disciplinary discourse communities. For instance, the choice between hypothesis, theory, and speculation in academic contexts carries significant implications for how audiences evaluate the credibility and importance of proposed ideas. Furthermore, advanced persuasive vocabulary includes sophisticated hedging language that enables speakers to make strong claims while acknowledging uncertainty and alternative perspectives. Terms such as arguably, presumably, ostensibly, and conceivably allow for nuanced presentations of evidence and reasoning that demonstrate intellectual sophistication without sacrificing persuasive impact. The strategic deployment of such language requires understanding both its logical functions and its social effects, how it positions the speaker as thoughtful and careful, rather than dogmatic or simplistic. Advanced speakers also understand the persuasive power of metaphorical language and must develop competency in employing metaphors that illuminate rather than obscure logical relationships. Effective metaphorical thinking requires cultural literacy, understanding how particular images and comparisons will resonate with specific audiences, and sensitivity to the potential limitations and distortions that metaphors might introduce into complex discussions. Advanced persuasive discourse also employs sophisticated transitional language that guides audiences through complex argumentative structures while maintaining logical coherence. Beyond elementary connectors such as because and therefore, sophisticated speakers deploy a rich arsenal of transitional devices, concessive markers such as nevertheless and notwithstanding, explanatory phrases such as that is to say and in other words, and progression indicators such as furthermore, moreover, and in addition to these considerations. These linguistic tools enable the construction of arguments that acknowledge complexity and nuance while maintaining clear logical progression.
The structural organization of advanced persuasive discourse demands sophisticated understanding of argumentative architecture and audience psychology. While elementary persuasive attempts often follow simple patterns such as claim, evidence, and conclusion, advanced persuasive discourse employs complex organizational strategies that anticipate audience reactions, address competing perspectives, and guide recipients through multifaceted reasoning processes. Contemporary research in cognitive psychology and communication studies has identified several organizational patterns that prove particularly effective for sophisticated audiences. The problem-solution structure begins with comprehensive analysis of existing challenges before presenting proposed remedies, allowing audiences to appreciate both the necessity for change and the adequacy of proposed responses. The comparative analysis structure examines multiple alternative approaches, demonstrating the superior merits of the recommended course of action through systematic evaluation of competing options. More sophisticated still is the dialectical structure, which presents thesis and antithesis before synthesizing opposing perspectives into a more comprehensive understanding. This approach, derived from philosophical traditions, proves particularly effective with educated audiences who expect acknowledgement of complexity and nuance. Such structures require exceptional linguistic competency, the ability to present opposing viewpoints fairly and comprehensively, to identify points of convergence and divergence, and to construct synthetic arguments that transcend rather than simply compromise between alternatives. Advanced persuasive discourse also employs strategic revelation of information, understanding that the sequence in which evidence and arguments are presented significantly affects their persuasive impact. This requires psychological insight into audience processing patterns, understanding when to present strongest evidence first to establish credibility versus when to build toward climactic revelations, when to address counterarguments preemptively versus when to allow audiences to develop questions before providing responses. Having examined the linguistic and structural foundations of advanced persuasive discourse, let us now turn our attention to the profound transformations that digital technologies have introduced into the contemporary persuasive landscape. The emergence of social media platforms, algorithmic content curation, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence systems has fundamentally altered both the mechanisms through which persuasive messages reach audiences and the psychological processes through which individuals evaluate and respond to persuasive appeals. Traditional models of persuasion assumed relatively stable audiences with identifiable characteristics and predictable information processing patterns. Speakers could reasonably expect that their audiences would encounter persuasive messages in their entirety, would have sufficient time for careful consideration, and would evaluate arguments within relatively consistent contextual frameworks. Digital technologies have disrupted each of these assumptions, creating new challenges and opportunities for persuasive practitioners. Social media platforms have fragmented audiences into increasingly specialized communities characterized by shared interests, values, and informational sources. This fragmentation enables unprecedented targeting precision, allowing persuasive practitioners to craft messages specifically tailored to particular demographic segments, psychological profiles, and behavioral patterns. However, this same fragmentation contributes to the creation of echo chambers and filter bubbles that can insulate audiences from challenging perspectives and create unrealistic expectations regarding the universal applicability of particular arguments. Furthermore, the algorithmic systems that govern content distribution on digital platforms introduce new variables into persuasive calculations. These algorithms, designed to maximize engagement rather than promote rational discourse, often prioritize emotionally provocative content over nuanced argumentation, sensational claims over careful analysis, and confirmation of existing beliefs over challenging new perspectives. Advanced persuasive practitioners must understand these algorithmic biases and develop strategies for creating content that can achieve viral distribution without sacrificing intellectual integrity or argumentative sophistication.
The acceleration of information flow in digital environments has profound implications for persuasive strategy and linguistic choices. Traditional persuasive discourse assumed audiences with sufficient attention spans for extended argumentation and complex evidence presentation. Contemporary digital audiences, conditioned by rapid information cycling and continuous stimulation, often exhibit reduced tolerance for lengthy arguments and complex reasoning processes. This attention economy creates new demands for persuasive efficiency, the ability to establish credibility quickly, to present compelling evidence concisely, and to guide audiences toward conclusions without extended perpetual argumentation. Such constraints require exceptional linguistic competency, mastery of compression techniques that maintain argumentative sophistication while reducing textual length, understanding of visual rhetoric that can supplement verbal argumentation, and a sensitivity to the pacing and rhythm of discourse in multimedia environments. However, advanced practitioners must resist the temptation to sacrifice intellectual rigor for mere accessibility. The challenge lies in developing hybrid approaches that can function effectively across multiple platforms and attention spans, creating content that offers immediate engagement for casual audiences while providing sufficient depth for sustained analysis by more committed recipients. This requires sophisticated understanding of layered communication strategies, multimodal rhetoric, and adaptive discourse that can respond to varying levels of audience investment. The data-driven nature of contemporary digital persuasion introduces additional complexities that advanced practitioners must navigate carefully. The availability of detailed audience analytics enables unprecedented personalization of persuasive messages, allowing speakers to adapt their appeals to individual psychological profiles, purchasing histories, social network positions, and behavioral patterns. While such personalization can enhance persuasive effectiveness by addressing specific audience concerns and interests, it also raises significant ethical questions regarding manipulation, privacy, and democratic discourse. The proliferation of artificial intelligence systems in content creation and distribution represents perhaps the most significant recent development in the persuasive landscape. Machine learning algorithms can now generate persuasive text, analyze audience responses in real time, and optimize messaging strategies through continuous experimentation and refinement. These capabilities offer powerful tools for persuasive practitioners while simultaneously creating new challenges for audiences seeking to evaluate the authenticity and credibility of persuasive appeals. Advanced English speakers must develop competencies for operating effectively in this AI-augmented environment. This includes understanding how to collaborate productively with AI systems and content creation while maintaining human oversight and ethical standards. It requires developing sensitivity to AI-generated content and understanding its potential strengths and limitations. Most importantly, it demands sophisticated critical thinking skills for evaluating persuasive messages that may incorporate AI-generated elements or target audiences through AI-driven strategies. The integration of AI systems into persuasive practice also raises fundamental questions about the nature of authenticity and credibility in digital discourse.
When persuasive messages are crafted through human-AI collaboration, when audience targeting is optimized through algorithmic analysis, and when message effectiveness is continuously refined through automated testing, traditional concepts of authorial voice and authentic communication require substantial reconceptualization. Furthermore, the global reach of digital platforms necessitates cross-cultural competency in persuasive practice. Arguments that prove compelling within particular cultural contexts may fail dramatically when translated across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Advanced practitioners must develop sensitivity to cultural variations in argumentative styles, evidentiary standards, and rhetorical preferences while maintaining the authenticity and integrity of their persuasive appeals.
The ethical dimensions of digital persuasion demand particular attention from advanced practitioners. The sophisticated targeting capabilities of contemporary platforms, combined with detailed psychological profiling and behavioral prediction, create unprecedented opportunities for manipulation and exploitation. The same technologies that enable beneficial applications, such as personalized education and targeted health interventions, can be deployed for deceptive advertising, political manipulation, and social control. Advanced English speakers must develop robust ethical frameworks for evaluating their own persuasive practices and for critically analyzing the persuasive appeals they encounter. This requires understanding the differences between legitimate influence and manipulative coercion, between honest advocacy and deceptive propaganda, between fair persuasion and exploitative targeting of psychological vulnerabilities. Professional and academic contexts increasingly demand explicit attention to these ethical considerations. Grant proposals, business presentations, and scholarly communications must demonstrate not merely persuasive effectiveness, but ethical responsibility. This requires linguistic competency in ethical discourse, the ability to articulate ethical principles clearly, to acknowledge potential conflicts of interest transparently, and to position persuasive appeals within broader frameworks of social responsibility and professional integrity. The development of ethical persuasive competency also requires understanding the broader social implications of persuasive practice. In democratic societies, the quality of public discourse depends upon citizens' ability to engage in rational deliberation, to evaluate competing arguments fairly, and to make informed decisions based on reliable evidence. Persuasive practitioners bear responsibility for contributing to, rather than undermining, this democratic capacity through their choice of strategies, their treatment of evidence, and their respect for audience autonomy. As we transition toward the practical application segment of today's discussion, let us examine specific strategies for developing advanced persuasive competencies while maintaining ethical standards and intellectual integrity. The development of sophisticated persuasive abilities requires systematic practice across multiple domains: analytical skills for evaluating arguments and evidence, linguistic competencies for expressing complex ideas clearly and compellingly, psychological insight for understanding audience motivations and responses, and ethical sensitivity for navigating the moral dimensions of influence. The foundation of advanced persuasive competency lies in developing sophisticated analytical capabilities. This begins with the ability to identify and evaluate the logical structure of arguments, distinguishing between premises and conclusions, recognizing implicit assumptions, identifying potential logical fallacies, and assessing the adequacy of evidence for supporting particular claims. Such analytical skills require extensive practice with diverse argumentative texts across multiple disciplines and contexts. Advanced practitioners must also develop competency in evidence evaluation, understanding the strengths and limitations of different types of supporting material. Statistical evidence requires understanding of sampling methods, confidence intervals, correlation versus causation, and the potential for data manipulation or misrepresentation. Expert testimony demands evaluation of credentials, potential conflicts of interest, consensus within relevant professional communities, and the limitations of expertise across different domains. Historical examples and case studies require assessment of relevance, representativeness, and the validity of analogical reasoning.
Furthermore, sophisticated persuasive practice requires metacognitive awareness, understanding your own cognitive biases, recognizing the limitations of your knowledge and expertise, and developing strategies for compensating for these limitations through collaborative research, peer review, and continuous learning. This self-awareness enables more honest and effective persuasive practice while reducing the likelihood of overconfident assertions or inadequately supported claims.
The linguistic dimension of advanced persuasive development requires systematic attention to multiple interconnected competencies. Vocabulary development must extend beyond mere accumulation of sophisticated terms to include understanding of register appropriateness, connotative effects, and cultural associations. This requires extensive reading across diverse disciplines and contexts, careful attention to how expert practitioners employ specialized terminology, and deliberate practice in adapting linguistic choices to specific audiences and purposes. Syntactic sophistication involves mastering complex sentence structures that can express nuanced relationships between ideas while maintaining clarity and readability. This includes coordination and subordination patterns that can effectively sequence multiple pieces of evidence, conditional structures that can explore hypothetical scenarios and their implications, and parallel structures that can create rhythmic and memorable expressions of key concepts. Advanced persuasive writing also requires sensitivity to stylistic effects and their relationship to persuasive goals. Formal academic style conveys authority and credibility, but may create distance between speaker and audience. Conversational style can enhance relatability and engagement, but may undermine perceptions of expertise and seriousness. Professional style attempts to balance these competing demands while maintaining appropriateness for business and institutional contexts. The advanced persuasive competency also requires understanding of audience analysis and adaptation strategies. Different audiences bring varying levels of expertise, different cultural backgrounds, distinct motivational structures, and diverse expectations regarding appropriate persuasive approaches. Advanced practitioners must develop sensitivity to these variations while maintaining consistency in their core message and values. Practical application of advanced persuasive competencies requires understanding of genre conventions and contextual constraints across different professional and academic settings. Business presentations demand conciseness, practical focus, and clear connection to organizational goals and stakeholder interests. Academic papers require comprehensive literature review, methodological transparency, and explicit positioning within disciplinary conversations. Policy proposals need careful attention to implementation feasibility, cost-benefit analysis, and political viability. Each context imposes distinct linguistic and structural demands while maintaining underlying principles of effective argumentation. Business presentations typically employ direct organizational patterns, concrete examples, and quantitative evidence, while academic papers may require more complex theoretical frameworks, extensive qualification of claims, and detailed methodological justification. Policy documents must balance technical accuracy with accessibility to diverse stakeholder communities. Advanced practitioners develop repertoires of genre-specific strategies while maintaining underlying competencies that transfer across contexts. This requires understanding both the surface-level conventions of different professional genres and the deeper rhetorical principles that govern effective communication within particular discourse communities. The globalization of professional and academic discourse introduces additional complexities for advanced persuasive practice. International audiences may bring different cultural expectations regarding appropriate argumentative styles, authority relationships, directness versus indirectness, and the role of personal relationships in professional communication. Advanced practitioners must develop cross-cultural sensitivity while maintaining authenticity and effectiveness in their persuasive appeals. The integration of technology into advanced persuasive practice requires developing new competencies while maintaining traditional rhetorical strengths. Multimedia presentations offer opportunities for enhanced engagement through visual elements, interactive features, and multimodal communication, but they also create new potential for distraction, technical failures, and audience fragmentation. Advanced practitioners must learn to leverage technological capabilities while maintaining focus on core persuasive objectives. Digital platforms enable real-time audience feedback and adaptive messaging, allowing speakers to modify their approaches based on immediate audience responses or technical constraints.
However, such adaptability requires exceptional situational awareness, rapid analytical capabilities, and the ability to maintain argumentative coherence while adjusting to unexpected audience reactions or technical constraints. The archival nature of digital communication creates new considerations for persuasive practice. Unlike traditional face-to-face presentations that exist primarily in the memories of participants, digital persuasive content may be preserved, redistributed, and recontextualized indefinitely. This permanence requires careful attention to accuracy, appropriate qualification of claims, and sensitivity to how messages might be interpreted in different temporal and cultural contexts. Advanced practitioners must also develop competencies for operating effectively in hybrid environments that combine synchronous and asynchronous communication, individual and collaborative platforms, and formal and informal interaction modes. Such environments require sophisticated understanding of how to maintain coherent persuasive strategies across multiple channels and timeframes while adapting to the distinct affordances and constraints of different technological platforms.
As we approach the conclusion of today's comprehensive examination, let us consider the broader implications of advanced persuasive competency for professional development, civic participation, and personal fulfillment. The ability to communicate complex ideas clearly and compellingly represents one of the most valuable skills in contemporary professional environments, where success increasingly depends upon the capacity to influence stakeholders, build consensus among diverse groups, and advocate effectively for innovative approaches to persistent challenges. In academic contexts, persuasive competency enables scholars to communicate their research findings to broader audiences, to secure funding for important investigations, and to influence policy discussions through evidence-based advocacy. The translation of specialized knowledge into accessible and compelling public discourse represents a crucial function in democratic societies that depend upon informed citizen participation in complex policy decisions. Professional advancement across virtually all fields requires persuasive competency for proposal writing, presentation delivery, negotiation conduct, and leadership communication. The ability to articulate vision clearly, to build support for strategic initiatives, and to guide organizations through complex change processes depends fundamentally upon sophisticated persuasive capabilities that integrate analytical rigor with effective communication strategies. Furthermore, advanced persuasive competency contributes to personal agency and civic engagement by enabling individuals to participate more effectively in democratic discourse, to advocate for causes they value, and to resist manipulation by those who would exploit psychological vulnerabilities for commercial or political advantage. The capacity to evaluate arguments critically and to construct compelling counter-arguments represents essential equipment for informed citizenship in complex democratic societies. The development of advanced persuasive competency also contributes to intellectual growth and personal satisfaction through the enhanced capacity to engage with complex ideas, to participate in sophisticated discourse communities, and to contribute meaningfully to important conversations that shape social, political, and professional environments. The ability to express nuanced thoughts clearly and compellingly represents a form of intellectual freedom that enables fuller participation in the rich conversations that constitute human culture and knowledge. Moreover, ethical persuasive practice contributes to the broader goal of improving the quality of public discourse by demonstrating how complex arguments can be presented fairly and compellingly, how evidence can be employed responsibly and transparently, and how disagreement can be conducted respectfully and productively. Advanced practitioners serve as models for constructive engagement with difficult questions and competing perspectives. The continuous development of persuasive competencies
also requires ongoing learning and adaptation as communication technologies evolve, audience expectations change, and new challenges emerge that require innovative approaches to influence and advocacy. This lifelong learning process contributes to intellectual vitality and professional effectiveness while providing opportunities for meaningful contribution to important conversations and social progress. Finally, the mastery of advanced persuasive competencies enables individuals to serve as mentors and teachers for others seeking to develop these crucial skills, thereby multiplying the positive effects of sophisticated communication capabilities throughout organizations and communities. The ability to help others develop their own persuasive competencies represents both a professional opportunity and a social responsibility for those who have achieved advanced proficiency. Today's extended exploration of persuasive competency in the digital age has taken us through classical rhetorical foundations, contemporary linguistic sophistication, technological transformation of persuasive environments, and practical applications for professional and personal development. We have examined how ancient insights into human psychology remain relevant in contemporary contexts, while acknowledging the profound changes that digital technologies have introduced into persuasive practice. The development of advanced persuasive competency requires systematic attention to multiple interconnected dimensions: analytical capabilities for evaluating arguments and evidence, linguistic sophistication for expressing complex ideas clearly and compellingly, technological competency for operating effectively in digital environments, and ethical sensitivity for maintaining integrity while seeking to influence others. These competencies develop through sustained practice, continuous learning, and thoughtful reflection on the broader implications of persuasive practice for democratic discourse and social progress. As we conclude today's discussion, I encourage you to consider how the principles and strategies we have examined might enhance your own professional and personal communication effectiveness. What aspects of persuasive competency require further development in your own practice? How might you contribute to improving the quality of discourse within your professional and civic communities? What ethical commitments will guide your employment of increasingly sophisticated persuasive capabilities? Next week, we shall examine the intersection of artificial intelligence and human creativity, exploring how emerging technologies are transforming artistic expression, while raising fundamental questions about the nature of creativity, authorship, and aesthetic value. Until then, I encourage you to engage thoughtfully with the persuasive messages you encounter while practicing the analytical and productive competencies we have discussed today. This is Olivia from Artificial Fluency, thanking you for your sustained attention to today's complex examination and wishing you continued success in developing the sophisticated communication capabilities that characterize truly advanced English proficiency. Thank you for listening.